I'd like to give you an introduction to using ArcScene. This is an app that's available as part of ArcGIS Desktop, and it's really designed to do three-dimensional visualization with things like digital elevation models or TINs. So the first thing I'm going to do is add some data to ArcScene. So we add this in the same way we would in ArcMap. And I'm going to use some Whistler data that I have here, and I've got a DEM that's a 30-meter spatial resolution. Just click Add. And this is the default view that you'll see. So the first thing you'll have to get used to is being able to navigate or rotate things, moving things around with the mouse. So in order to move this around, I click the Navigate tool. And then you can use the left and right mouse buttons to move things up and down. So I'm using both buttons at the same time here. Left button to rotate back and forth, up and down. It's the kind of thing that you'll get used to very quickly, I think, when you try it out for yourself. So you may notice to begin with that the symbology is pretty basic. It's just a grayscale, and that there's no actual three-dimensional quality to this when you start out. You have to actually tell it what to use for the Z values in order for it to be able to show that as more of a 3D surface. So what we're going to do is right-click on the DEM itself and go to Properties. And this will bring up a dialog box that has a number of different properties in it. And we'll go to base heights. So you'll see that by default, it says no elevation values from a surface. What we want to do is assign it elevation values. So we'll select floating on a custom surface. And it's already by default selected my DEM, since that's the only raster data I'm using right now. And click OK. And so you'll see that it now knows that you want to use the DEM as the surface data, so it's applied that, so you can see that we now have more of a three-dimensional surface. So that's a pretty good start. Now, if you want to exaggerate this a bit, you can change the vertical exaggeration. We can go to Scene Layers and right-click on that, and go to Scene Properties. And you'll see that there's a vertical exaggeration here. There's some set ones, so let's try something fairly dramatic, like 5 times. And say OK. Now it looks like it's disappeared, so we'll zoom out a little bit. It's just moved it around. We can zoom back in. And so you can see that we now have a very dramatic looking vertical exaggeration for our landscape. I did this on purpose just so you could see the effect that it has, but I would not encourage you to use something that makes it look too distorted or a little sort of out of whack. So a little bit of vertical distortion can be a good thing if it helps people see differences better in terms of the terrain. But I would use it sparingly or be careful about how you apply it. So I'm going to go back and change that to 1.5. And just for fun, I want you to know that you can change the background color. So sometimes people will use something that looks more like sky. If you do that, so then you get that kind of effect. That's completely up to you. It's purely a taste thing. I'm not saying this is beautiful, but it's just to show that it's there. So now we have 1.5 vertical exaggeration. We can change the symbology if I right-click on the DEM and go to Properties, Symbology. You have the same symbology options available as you would in ArcMap pretty much. So here I can change the color ramp and click OK. So this is a fairly standard looking elevation model color ramp. There are other ones available. This is a good one to start with if you're not sure what else to use. And so now you can see that we have a pretty good rendering of our three-dimensional DEM for Whistler, BC. So let's try adding other data layers to our ArcScene map. Just go to Add Data. And for example, I can add a slope raster to my map. Now you'll see that by default, the slope layer is just like the DEM when it started, is that it's basically just a flat layer that doesn't have any kind of 3D quality to it at this point. So what we're going to do is go into Slope Properties. So right-click on Slope, go to Properties, go to Base Heights, and what we're going to do is assign the base heights from our DEM so that it knows to use the DEM base heights for our slope data set. You can use this with any data set, really. You can just assign the DEM values to that, and it will act as though the slope is following the same terrain as the DEM itself. I'll click OK. And now you can see that it's following the same terrain as the DEM. Now you may notice though that there's a bit of a problem here, is that if I turn off the DEM, you'll see that the slope is there, but it's not being shown properly because what's happening is it's essentially trying to show two different layers with exactly the same elevation. And so the way that the data sets get rendered is that they're kind of interfering with each other. So there's a way to fix that. Now, one way to fix it would be to just turn off the DEM completely and just show the slope map. And of course, I can change the symbology and make it look nicer and just show the slope map by itself. But if I want to somehow include both, I'll show you how to do that as well. So what I can do is right-click on the DEM, go to Properties, go to the Rendering tab, and you'll see here that you can select the drawing priority for aerial features. So in other words, what I can do is lower the rendering priority for my DEM. Let's make it as low as it can be, which is 10. Click OK. And so now you'll see that what's happened is that it's saying, oh, the slope data has a higher priority when rendering, so that will be done first, it will be on top, and the base map data will be underneath. There's other ways to do this. You could, for example, add, say, 1 meter to the slope values of the base heights in order to raise it up slightly. Sometimes that trick works as well. This seems to have worked pretty well here, so that's fine. That's all you really need to do. If I did want to change the offset, I could right-click on the slope, go to Properties, go back to my Base Heights tab, and you'll see here there's an option for layer offset. So add a constant elevation offset in scene units. So if I made this, let's say 5 meters and say OK, then that actually raises everything up just slightly above the base heights that are set by the DEM. You can make this whatever you want. It's a bit subjective. Sometimes it's a useful thing to be able to do if you have multiple layers that you're trying to render together and you want to make sure that they are on top of each other correctly. Sometimes it can be slightly tricky. You have to play with it a little bit, but it's a good trick to know in case you need it. So that's a brief overview of ArcScene. Like all software, I encourage you to explore it, look at the different functionality that's available, the different tools, and get to know it a little bit. It can be quite useful for doing different types of 3D visualization.